The scent of cardamom and cinnamon still clung to her hair when Olivia Rose awoke that March morning, 9 years after vanishing from the Brazilian headlines. Her hands trembled as she touched the silver locket she'd never removed from her neck, the initials OR delicately engraved by a Copacabana jeweler that now seemed to exist in another dimension, another life that perhaps had never truly been hers. The small hospital room in Arid Springs smelled of disinfectant and stale sweat. Through the fogged window, she could see the arid mountains stretching to the horizon, cut by a dirt road that disappeared around a bend like a broken promise. It was the same kind of landscape she'd last seen from the wicker basket of that hot air balloon, when the world still made sense and Karim still whispered wedding vows in her ear. Now, sitting on the edge of the hospital bed, Olivia examined her own hands, thin, calloused, scarred with stories she refused to tell aloud. The Brazilian nurse, Carlos, had tried to talk to her the previous night, but the words wouldn't come. Not because she'd forgotten how to speak Portuguese, the language remained intact in her mind like a familiar song, but because some truths were too big to fit into simple words. The door creaked open. It was Jamil, the rancher who'd found her in the cave 3 days prior. He held a cup of warm tea and wore that cautious expression she'd learned to recognize, the one people used when they didn't know whether to treat her as a victim, a miracle, or a ghost. "How are you feeling today?" he asked in heavily accented English, his voice as rough as the sand that covered everything in this place. Olivia looked at him for a long moment. Jamil was about 50, sun-baked skin and eyes that seemed to have seen a lot without ever judging anyone for it. There was something familiar about his face, a kindness she hadn't felt for so long. She'd almost forgotten what it was like to be near someone who wanted nothing in return. "Better," she lied, accepting the tea. The warm liquid went down her throat and warmed her chest, but it couldn't melt the cold that had settled in her bones over the past 9 years. "The doctors said you can be discharged tomorrow," Jamil continued, sitting in the plastic chair beside the bed. "But you have nowhere to go, do you?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Olivia closed her eyes and tried to remember what it was like to have a home. There was a house in Ipanema, a small but bright apartment where she used to wake to the sound of the waves. There was a mother who had probably given up hope, friends who had moved on, a whole life that had become archaeology. "No," she finally replied. Jamil nodded, as if he already knew the answer. "You can stay with me for a while. I have a small house, but it's peaceful. No one will bother you there." There was something in the way he said it, a quiet determination that suggested he was willing to protect her, even without knowing exactly what from. Olivia felt a wave of gratitude so intense it almost knocked her over. It had been so long since anyone had offered to care for her without expecting something in return. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Jamil was silent for a moment, turning the simple wedding band on his finger. "I lost my wife 5 years ago," he eventually said. "Cancer. During her last months, she always said she wished someone would take care of me when she was gone." He smiled sadly. "Maybe it's my turn to care for someone?" Olivia felt her eyes burn. It was the first time in 9 years that someone had talked to her about care without it sounding like a business transaction or a form of control. In captivity, the nomads treated her as a precious but dangerous investment. Before that, Karim, his name surfaced in her mind like a sharp blade, slicing through any sense of peace she might have been experiencing. Karim al-Malik, the man who had promised to show her the world, who whispered words of love in 3 different languages, who showered her with expensive gifts, and then... "Are you all right?" Jamil's voice brought her back to the present. Olivia realized. She was gripping the locket so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. "Sorry, sometimes I remember things." "You don't need to explain," Jamil said gently, "but if you want to talk about anything, I'll be here." That night, alone in the hospital room, Olivia finally allowed the memories to flood back. She remembered the morning it all began, the hot air balloons swaying gently in the morning breeze, the Sahara dunes stretching endlessly below them like a golden ocean. Karim had been radiant that day, his dark eyes shining with an excitement she'd interpreted as romantic. "Today is special," he'd said, holding her hands as the balloon slowly ascended. "Today, my love, you'll see the world in a whole new way." She'd laughed, resting her head on his shoulder, breathing in the expensive cologne he always wore, a blend of amber and spices that now made her feel nauseous just to remember. "You always say that," she'd replied. "Every trip with you is special," but there had been something different that day. Karim seemed tense, constantly checking his phone, gazing at the horizon as if expecting to see something specific. When she asked if everything was all right, he just smiled and said it was work, always work. It was when they were at the highest point of the flight that everything changed. Karim's phone rang, and he answered in rapid Arabic, a tone Olivia had never heard before. Cold, calculating, cruel. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. It was the tone of someone giving orders to do something terrible. "Karim," she said after he hung up, "what's going on?" He looked at her for a long moment, and for the first time in months of dating, Olivia saw his real face. Not the charming mask he wore in public, but something far darker. "You shouldn't have heard that," he said calmly. "Heard what?" "I don't even understand Arabic. But you're too smart, Olivia. Always have been, always asking questions, always curious about my business." He moved closer to her in the small gondola basket, and for the first time she felt fear of him. "You know too much." That's when she saw the documents he was trying to hide in his inside jacket pocket. Without thinking, she grabbed them before he could stop her. They were contracts, photographs, bank transfers, all in Arabic and English, but with numbers even she could understand. Millions of dollars, trafficking routes, names of politicians she recognized from the news. "What is this, Karim?" Her voice came out as a whisper. He tried to grab the papers back, but she stepped away, pressing herself against the edge of the basket. "Give it back, Olivia, now! You're involved in human trafficking." It wasn't a question. The evidence was there, in black and white, with his signature at the bottom of each contract. Karim's face transformed completely. The mask of charm and sophistication vanished, revealing something cold and predatory. "You don't understand how the world works," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You don't understand what it takes to maintain power." "Oh my God," she murmured, staring at the documents with growing horror. "How many people? How many women?" "Give me back the papers, Olivia." She looked at him and saw her own death reflected in his eyes. In that moment, 30,000 feet above the desert, she understood that she had never truly known Karim. Al-Malik, the man who had promised to marry her, who took her to expensive dinners and showered her with lavish gifts, was a ghost. The real man was standing before her, willing to kill her to protect his secrets. "No," she said, folding the papers and tucking them inside her dress. "I'm not giving them back." What happened next was still hazy in her memory. She remembered Karim lunging at her, a brief but violent struggle in the cramped space of the basket. She remembered the sound of something tearing, ropes perhaps, or the basket itself. She remembered the feeling of free fall, the wind cutting her face like razors, the impact that knocked her unconscious. When she woke up, she was alone in a makeshift hospital in a nomadic tent, with injuries that would take months to fully heal. The Bedouins who found her spoke of a man who had survived the fall as well, but who had left with other men in a helicopter. He had left specific instructions: keep her alive, but keep her hidden. There would be a reward. The reward never came. Years passed, and Olivia became first a valuable prisoner, then an inconvenient liability, finally just another mouth to feed in a group barely surviving in the desert. She learned Arabic out of necessity, learned to move silently so as not to disturb her captors, learned to hide the documents she still carried as if they were sacred relics. And all that time, she thought about Karim. He had survived the fall. He had left in a helicopter. He had left instructions for her to be kept alive but hidden. Why hadn't he killed her? Why hadn't he retrieved the documents personally? The answer came 3 years later, when one of the nomads brought in an old newspaper he had found in a nearby town. On the front page, a photograph. Karim al-Malik, a young blonde woman at a lavish wedding in Dubai. The headline announced the union of the young billionaire businessman with the daughter of an influential European politician. Olivia held the newspaper with trembling hands, studying the photograph for hours. Karim was smiling, but she could see the coldness behind his eyes. The bride looked happy, radiant, completely oblivious to the kind of man she was marrying. It was then that Olivia understood. She hadn't just been a girlfriend to Karim. She had been a test, an experiment to see how far he could go. And when she became a risk, he had decided to dispose of her in the most convenient way possible, letting the desert and the nomads do the dirty work for him. But he had made a mistake. He had let her live, and he had underestimated her determination to survive. Now, 9 years later, lying in that hospital bed in Arid Springs, Olivia finally knew what she needed to do. The documents were still with her, hidden in a place even the nomads hadn't found. And she had a story to tell, a story that could destroy Karim's empire and save however many women he was planning to traffic at that very moment. But first, she needed to survive. Because she knew with absolute certainty that as soon as Karim found out she was alive, he would come after her, and this time he wouldn't make the mistake of letting her breathe. Outside the window, the desert wind began to blow stronger, carrying sand and whispers of a storm. Olivia closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but in her dreams, she still heard Karim's voice. "You know too much, my love. Too much." Jamil's phone rang at 3 in the morning, a shrill sound that cut through the desert silence like a blade. Olivia woke instantly, all her survival instincts firing at once. 9 years of captivity had taught Olivia that middle-of-the-night calls never brought good news. She could hear Jamil speaking Arabic in the next room, his voice strained and low. After a few minutes, his footsteps approached her room. He knocked softly before entering, and Olivia could see from the expression on his face that something had drastically changed. "Get dressed," he said without preamble. "We need to leave, now." "What happened?" "There were inquiries about you at the hospital. Men in expensive cars offering cash for information about the Brazilian woman who was found." Jamil was already pulling a duffel bag from under her bed, filling it with her few belongings. "Carlos, the nurse, called to warn me. They weren't the police." Olivia's blood ran cold. She knew exactly who those men were. "How much time do we have?" "Maybe an hour, maybe less, depending on how much money they offered." Olivia dressed quickly, her fingers trembling as she buttoned her shirt. 9 years. Karim had waited 9 years to find out she was alive, and now that he knew, he wouldn't waste any time. She thought of the documents hidden in her old cave, the evidence that could destroy him if it fell into the right hands. "Jamil," she said. When they were finished packing, "There's something I need to get before we leave." He stopped checking the windows and looked at her. "Where?" "The cave where you found me. I hid something there. Something important." "We don't have time for—" "It's the only thing that can keep me alive," she interrupted, grabbing his arm. "It's the only thing that can stop him from doing this to other women." Jamil studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. 5 minutes, no more. They slipped out the back door, moving like shadows across the arid landscape. The moon was almost full, providing enough light to navigate, but also making them more visible if anyone was looking. Olivia guided Jamil along the winding trail to the cave, her feet automatically finding the path she had walked so many times in her dreams. The cave smelled of damp stone and bad memories. Olivia went straight to the back wall, where she had dug a small hole behind a loose rock. Her fingers found the package wrapped in plastic, still intact after all these years. "What is it?" Jamil asked. "Documents," she replied, checking if the contents were still legible. "Evidence of human trafficking, corruption, murder, all signed by Karim Al-Malik." Jamil whistled softly. "That's why he wants her dead. That's why he should have killed me 9 years ago." They were leaving the cave when they heard the distant sound of engines. Vehicles approaching rapidly down the dirt road, headlights cutting through the darkness like fingers searching for something specific. Jamil pulled Olivia behind the rocks beside the cave entrance, both holding their breath. 3 black cars pulled up near Jamil's house. Men in suits emerged from the vehicles, speaking Arabic as they spread out across the property. Even from a distance, Olivia could see they weren't local police. They were professionals, the kind of men Karim used to solve problems. "Is there another way out of here?" she whispered. Jamil nodded, indicating a nearly invisible trail winding through the mountains. "Leads to the main road, but it's a 2-hour hike." They began to move, keeping low and silent. Olivia held the documents against her chest as if they were a talisman, feeling the weight of 9 years of suffering and determination with each step. Behind them, she could hear the men searching Jamil's house, breaking things, looking for clues. It was when they were halfway there that she heard the voice. "Olivia." She froze. It was impossible, but she knew that voice better than her own. Slowly she turned. Karim Al-Malik stood about 50 yards away, alone, his expensive clothes contrasting sharply with the arid landscape. He looked exactly as he did the last time she had seen him, as if the 9 years hadn't passed for him. Handsome, elegant, and utterly dangerous. "You shouldn't have survived," he said, his voice carrying across the night air with that terrible familiarity. Olivia felt Jamil tense beside her, but she raised a hand to stop him from making any sudden moves. "But I did," she replied, surprised by the firmness of her own voice. Karim began walking toward them, each step calculated and predatory. "9 years, Olivia. 9 years searching for you, thinking you were dead, blaming myself for a tragic accident." He smiled, but there was no humor in that smile. "Imagine my surprise when I found out you were alive and well, hidden in the middle of nowhere like a buried secret. You left me for dead. I left you with people who could take care of you until I decided what to do." He stopped about 10 yards away. "You were always too dramatic." The casualness with which he spoke about her captivity, as if it were a favor he had done, made Olivia's anger explode like a flame. "Take care of me? They held me prisoner for 9 years. And you're alive, aren't you?" Karim shrugged. "Many women in your circumstances wouldn't have been so lucky. Circumstances you created. Circumstances you created by being too curious." His eyes fixed on the package she held against her chest. "I hope you still have my documents. It will be easier for all of us if you simply return them." Olivia clutched the package tighter. "So you can continue selling women like cattle. So I can continue my business without interference." Karim pulled a cigarette from his pocket and lit it calmly, as if they were having a casual conversation. "You don't understand the complexities of what I do, Olivia. You've always been too simplistic, too moralistic. The world isn't black and white like you'd like it to be. Human trafficking is black as night, Karim." He laughed, a low, humorless sound. "You think these women had other options? Do you think they were living better lives before they worked for me? At least now, they have purpose, a way to generate value. The coldness in his voice made Olivia feel nauseous. This was the man who had whispered words of love in her ear, who had promised to show her the world. How had she been so blind? "You're sick," she murmured. "I'm rich," he corrected, "and powerful, and willing to do whatever it takes to stay. That way." He tossed his cigarette to the ground and ground it out with his heel, including killing old farmers who meddle where they don't belong. It was only then that Olivia realized Karim's men had positioned themselves on the rocks surrounding them. Jamil noticed too, his hand instinctively moving to the knife at his belt. "No," Karim said, following the movement. "No unnecessary violence. I still hold out hope that Olivia will be reasonable." Reasonable? Olivia felt a hysterical laugh rising in her throat. "You want me to be reasonable after 9 years of captivity? I want you to be smart." Karim took another step toward her. "You have 2 options. You can return my documents and disappear again, this time to a more comfortable location with a substantial bank account to ensure your silence. Or you can continue being stubborn and find out why so many people are afraid to cross me." Olivia looked at the men positioned on the rocks, then at Jamil, who was clearly calculating his chances of protecting her against a dozen armed professionals. Finally, she looked back at Karim, the man who had destroyed her life and would continue, destroying the lives of other women if she did nothing. "There's a third option," she said. Karim raised an eyebrow. "Which would be?" Olivia pulled her phone from her pocket, the same one Jamil had given her to use in emergencies. With quick movements, she took pictures of the documents, one after another, the flash briefly illuminating the pages. "What are you doing?" Karim's voice had lost its controlled calm. "Making sure that if anything happens to me, this information reaches the right people." She continued photographing, her hands surprisingly steady. "I have contacts in the Brazilian press. I have friends who know I'm alive. If I disappear again, they'll know exactly where to look." "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Olivia finished photographing the documents and put the phone away. "Want to bet your freedom on it?" Silence stretched between them like a taut rope about to snap. Karim was studying her face, searching for signs of a lie or hesitation. Olivia forced herself to maintain eye contact, even as every fiber of her being wanted to run. "You know what your problem is, Olivia?" Karim finally said. "You always thought you were smarter than you actually are." He made an almost imperceptible signal with his hand, and Olivia heard the sound of footsteps approaching from the rocks. Karim's men were closing in around them. That's when Jamil acted. The farmer moved with a speed that surprised everyone, including Olivia. In one fluid motion, he pulled the knife from his belt and threw it with deadly accuracy at the nearest man, hitting him in the chest. At the same time, he shoved Olivia toward a crevice in the rocks. "Run!" he yelled. "Run! And don't look back." Olivia hesitated for a split second, watching Jamil face 3 armed men with only his hands. It was suicide, and they both knew it, but it was also her only chance to escape. She ran. Behind her, she could hear shouts, gunshots, the sound of a struggle. Every step she took felt like a betrayal of Jamil, but she knew that stopping would render his sacrifice useless. She squeezed through the crevice in the rocks, scraping her skin, and emerged on the other side in a desperate dash down the mountain. The sound of the gunshots ceased abruptly, and Olivia knew what that meant. Jamil was dead. The man who had offered kindness without expecting anything in return, who had risked his life to protect her, had paid the ultimate price for his goodness. She reached the main road as the sun began to rise, her clothes torn, her feet bleeding, but still carrying the phone with the photographs that could destroy Karim. A trucker saw her walking down the road and stopped, offering a ride to the nearest town. 3 hours later, In a dusty cyber cafe, Olivia sent the photographs to every journalistic contact she could find online. Brazilian newspapers, international human rights organizations, European news agencies. Every email she sent was a small revenge, a small justice for all the women Karim had sold and for the good man who had died to protect her. When she was finished, she sat in the uncomfortable chair of the cafe and finally allowed the tears to come. She cried for Jamil, for herself, for the 9 years lost, for the women who were still suffering because of one man's greed. But she also cried relief, because for the first time in 9 years, she had fought back. She had transformed her survival into something more than just existing. She had transformed it into resistance. The cafe phone rang, and the owner answered in Arabic. After a few minutes of conversation, he hung up and looked directly at Olivia. She didn't need to speak the language to understand that someone was asking about her. It was time to leave again. But this time, she wasn't running away. She was heading toward justice, carrying the memory of Jamil and the promise that his sacrifice would not be in vain. Wherever Karim Al-Malik was at that moment, wherever he was plotting his next atrocity, he would soon discover that some women are far harder to break than he imagined. And some stories, once told, can never be silenced. Olivia left the cafe and walked toward the bus station, the documents still secure in her backpack, her phone still holding the evidence that would change everything. She didn't know exactly where she was going, but she knew she was finally free, not just physically, but spiritually. The desert sun beat on her back as she boarded the bus that would take her away from there, toward an uncertain but her own future. On the horizon, the mountains seemed smaller, less menacing, as if they knew she was no longer the same woman who had been found trembling in a cave. She was a survivor, a witness, a voice that refused to be silenced. And that, Olivia knew, was more powerful than any money or influence Karim Al-Malik could wield. The bus rattled along the bumpy road, carrying her away from the mountains that had been both her prison and her refuge. Olivia held her backpack tightly, as if the documents inside were the only thing keeping her grounded. Every kilometer away from Arid Springs was a small victory, but also a painful farewell to the last place where she had found genuine kindness. Jamil was dead. The certainty settled in her chest like a cold stone. He had died for her, for a woman. He'd known only a few days, for a cause he didn't even fully understand. Guilt threatened to engulf her, but Olivia forced herself to channel it into determination. If Jamil had given his life so she could tell her story, then she would make that story worth every drop of blood spilled. The bus stopped in a larger town, where signs of modern civilization began to appear. Cell phone towers, English signs, tourists with cameras. Olivia got off and found a small hotel where she could check in without too many questions. She paid in cash the little Jamil had insisted she take, and locked herself in the room. The first thing she did was turn on the television and look for international news. She didn't have to look far. Her own picture appeared on the screen, an old image from 9 years ago, when she was still young and naive enough to believe the world was a fair place. Brazilian woman Olivia Rose, missing for 9 years after a hot air balloon trip in Morocco, has been found alive, the anchorwoman said. Local sources confirm she was held captive by a nomadic group. Authorities are still investigating the circumstances of her disappearance. Olivia turned off the TV. The official version was already being constructed, and she knew exactly who was behind it. Karim had enough influence to control the narrative, to paint himself as the victim of a tragic accident instead of the perpetrator of a heinous crime. But he didn't know about the photographs. Not yet. Olivia turned on the laptop she had bought in town and began checking her emails. One by one, the replies started to arrive. Journalists asking questions, editors requesting confirmation, human rights organizations asking for more information. Then she saw the message that made her blood run cold. Olivia, darling, I see you're still being stubborn. Jamil paid the price for your stubbornness. How many more people need to die before you understand that you can't beat me? I have one final offer for you. If you accept, I promise no one else will get hurt. If you refuse, well, you have family in Brazil, don't you? A mother who still prays for your return every night? It would be a shame if something were to happen to her. Okay. Olivia's hands trembled as she reread the message. Karim had found a way to track her, to find out her email contacts. Worse, he was threatening her mother, the only person in the world who still loved her unconditionally, despite 9 years of silence. She closed the laptop and began pacing the room, her mind racing. Karim was trying to force her into a corner, using her love for her family as a weapon against her. It was exactly the kind of tactic a man like him would use, emotional blackmail combined with real threats. But there was something he didn't know, something she had discovered only a few hours before escaping the cave. During her last days of captivity, when the nomads had given up on receiving any ransom for her, Olivia had managed to access one of the guards' cell phones. She had used those few precious minutes not to call for help, but to research Karim al-Malik. What she found had changed everything. Karim wasn't just involved in human trafficking. He was under investigation by an international task force, a joint operation between the American FBI, Interpol, and European authorities. They knew about his crimes, but they didn't have enough evidence to arrest him. He was too careful, too well-connected, too protected by his wealth and influence. But now they had Olivia, and she had the documents. She picked up the phone and dialed a number she had memorized during her research. After several rings, a male voice answered in English. "Agent Matthews, FBI. My name is Olivia Rose," she said, her voice steady despite the fear she felt. "I believe you're looking for information about Karim al-Malik." There was silence on the other end of the line, then the sound of papers being shuffled. "Ms. Rose," the agent finally said, and she could hear the restrained excitement in his voice. "Where are you?" "Safe for now, but I need immediate protection for my mother in Brazil. Karim is threatening to kill her." "We can arrange that." "Do you have the evidence you mentioned in your emails?" "I have originals and photographs, signed, documents, bank transfers, trafficking routes, names of politicians involved." Olivia paused. "And I have a story to tell." Over the next 2 hours, Olivia told Agent Matthews everything. Every detail of her relationship with Karim, the discovery of the documents, the hot air balloon accident that wasn't an accident, the 9 years of captivity, Jamil's death. She spoke until her voice was hoarse, until there was nothing left hidden. "We'll get her," Matthews said when she finished. "A team is on its way. You did the right thing, Ms. Rose." "Jamil did the right thing," she corrected. "I'm just trying to make his death mean something." After hanging up the phone, Olivia sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed the reality of her situation to sink in. In a few hours, she would be under federal protection. Karim would be arrested. Her mother would be safe. The nightmare would finally end. But it wouldn't be that simple. Men like Karim didn't fall easily. They had resources, contacts, ways of making problems disappear. Even in prison, he would still be dangerous. And there would be others like him, others who would see his arrest as a warning to be more careful, not to stop. The fight was only just beginning. Olivia opened her backpack and took out the original documents, spreading them across the bed. Pages and pages of evidence, each one representing destroyed lives, shattered families, women sold as commodities. Among all the papers, there was something she hadn't shown even to Agent Matthews. A photograph. It was an old, faded picture of a small child with bright eyes and dark skin. On the back, a date, 2 years after her disappearance. Under the date, a word in Arabic she had learned during her captivity: son. Olivia had found the photograph. In the last place the nomads had held her, hidden among the belongings of one of the older women. The woman had tried to hide it when Olivia approached, but not before she saw the child's face. A face that had her eyes and the shape of Karim's chin. During the last days of captivity, Olivia had confronted the woman about the photograph. Through a mixture of broken Arabic and gestures, she had managed to extract the truth. After the balloon crash, when Olivia was unconscious and injured, the nomads had discovered she was pregnant. The child had been born prematurely but healthy, and the nomads had decided to keep her separate from Olivia, fearing she would use the baby to escape. The child had been sold to a wealthy family in a distant city when she was only a few months old. The woman didn't know any more details, only that the family had paid well for a baby of European appearance. Olivia studied the photograph for a long time, tracing the contours of the child's face with her finger. She had a son, a 9-year-old son who didn't know she existed, who had grown up thinking other people were his parents. A son who carried the DNA of both his victim and his perpetrator. Should she tell the FBI about the child? Should she try to find him? Or should she let the boy continue living a normal life, far from the toxicity of his origins? A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Olivia quickly hid the photograph and put the documents back in her backpack. Through the peephole, she saw 2 men in dark suits, one of them holding a badge. "Ms. Rose, we're from the FBI. Agent Matthews sent us." Olivia opened the door but kept the safety chain on. One of the men showed his badge. It looked legitimate, but she had learned to be wary of appearances. "How can I be sure you are who you say you are?" she asked. The older agent smiled. "Agent Matthews said you'd ask that. He asked me to say that you mentioned a farmer named Jamil and that he was killed trying to protect you." Olivia felt a pang in her chest at the mention of Jamil's name, but also relief. Only Matthews knew about Jamil. She removed the chain and opened the door. "We're here to take you to a safe place," the agent said. "We have a private plane waiting." As they escorted Olivia out of the hotel, she noticed other agents strategically positioned around the building. It was a serious, well-coordinated operation. For the first time in 9 years, she felt that maybe she was truly safe. But even as they got into the armored car, even as they drove away toward the airport, Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Maybe it was just paranoia. 9 years of captivity would teach anyone to distrust everyone and everything. Or maybe it was instinct. Karim Al-Malik had survived so long in the criminal underworld because he was smart, ruthless, and always 2 steps ahead of his enemies. It would be naive to think he would simply surrender because she had contacted the FBI. He was planning something. Olivia could feel it with the same certainty. She felt the air entering her lungs. The question was, what, and more importantly, would she be ready when he made his final move?